episode is a time to reflect on the division of labor within our personal relationships. When it comes to the emotional, manual, financial, and domestic burden, how do our evolving views on sex, love, gender roles, and power dynamics determine how we share responsibility? I'm your host, Mia Schachter. I'm an intimacy coordinator for film, TV, and theater, and a writer and educator in Los Angeles. Today I'm talking to Stella Hartman. She is a writer who focuses on self-love and finding peace in a quarantined world. Hi, Stella.
Hey.
How's it going?
It's good. Welcome to the place that I've been quarantined the most for the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, it looks like a cozy place to be.
Yeah, it's been good. I feel like I'm in a good spot in Echo Park, and we've been really lucky with where we've had to quarantine.
Cool. I'm glad to hear that. It must be, I am also fortunate to have people around. I've been really feeling for my friends who live by themselves right now.
I know everyone in self-isolation, I think, is really struggling in ways that I haven't seen before.
Yeah.
So lots of FaceTiming and video hangouts and all that stuff.
Yeah, and walks. It's
walking is
that's all we
the
got
number
right now.
one. I wake up in the I don't have a job anymore, so I'm I gotta do my walk. That's me going to work now.
Yeah. I mean, my therapist says just make sure that you go outside once a day, at least once a day.
Yeah. Makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. Fresh air and sunlight and just moving around.
Yeah.
So when you were growing up, how did you see labor divided in your family?
Very confusingly.
Cool.
And I think that part of it had to do with both my parents being immigrants and being first generation American, seeing how other friends maybe had those labor split in their household. But for the most part, when my dad was home, it was very traditional, African household expectations, where the man's not really doing any household chores, and he's coming home, dinner's got to be made. Not too unlike a 1950s housewife situation, which is also kind of dripping in misogyny. And I think my dad was not aware of that, because I think he liked to think of himself as someone that was very fair. And I saw my mom as someone who was very begrudgingly taking on those emotional labors. And I think that the other thing that I saw was a very big lack of emotional support for her. I don't really think my dad was doing that much emotional labor to sort of meet her halfway. So I didn't really have good examples of that growing up, to be quite honest. And I never really knew what that was, but I think learning the term emotional labor was probably one of the more powerful events of my life, because I was that's what that is. This opens up a whole new world for me, and I can now do a much better job of communicating with people in regards to that. And for me, I do a lot of balance as far as in a partnership or in relationships when it comes to emotional labor.
How do you remember learning the term emotional labor? How did that come into your psyche?
I remember learning it, but it was not that long ago. I think it was 4 or 5 years ago. And I had this friend, Shirley, who her and her partner Emily were always kind of you hear like a go-to couple where like they're really like learning and like progressing, and they have like all these terms, and I'm like, oh, you guys really go to therapy a lot. Okay, let me just like absorb some of this. And she was the first person that told me about what emotional labor was. And at the time I was in this relationship where I was doing so much emotional labor, and it didn't understand that it was work. I thought it was just an emotional state of being. And I think the distinction between being emotional and doing emotional labor is huge, because it takes some of the onus off of you in a way.
Right.
And you realize that this should be part of the dynamic of us functioning, and not like something I'm just bringing to the table and it's not being addressed or acknowledged.
Right. I think also, like, girls are raised to be more aware of their emotions and encouraged to share their emotions. And so emotional
Mhm.
labor comes a lot more easily to us, and for those same reasons is expected of us. So
Yeah.
there's like, I don't like to point fingers and blame men, certainly, for like putting that burden on us, because I think it's something that it's hard to say like I'm being blamed for this when we also like we take that on, right? And like we're already doing
Right.
it, and then oftentimes like by the time that we're burnt out on it, we're only just realizing like how much
Yes.
it's been kind of expected. And
Yeah.
um it everything for me like comes back to the wheel of consent. Are you familiar with the wheel of consent at all?
No, but I would like to
Okay.
learn.
Okay. Well, I'll share something with you later. But there's an area in the wheel of consent, the one quadrant called the accepting quadrant, and it's
Mhm.
it's opposed to the serving quadrant. And so, if one person's serving, the other person's accepting. And the
Mhm.
way that becomes non-consensual is when the person in the accepting quadrant starts to feel entitled to it, and starts
Yeah.
to forget about the gratitude component of it,
Yeah.
and starts to feel like and then they start to seem spoiled and privileged, and like they then the other person gets burnt out because there's no gratitude. But that's actually a dynamic that like keeping that dynamic, the serving accepting dynamic, consensual, is the responsibility of both parties, not just
Definitely.
of the person like doing the accepting. Like both parties have to say, this person serving has to say like, this is actually like the limit of that, this is the limit of my resources, this is how much I have to give.
Yeah.
um
I
is that
think
something that Sorry, go ahead.
that's probably where I was in that relationship at the time, of like just giving, giving, giving. And at some point, the accepting feels like taking if it's not
Yep.
balanced. And I feel like I was voicing, being like, I don't really want to be doing this that much anymore. Can you pick up the slack? Or I feel really tired, doing these things. Um, but I think the other thing about that relationship was I was in a relationship with a white man, and I think there was where I thought most of the emotional labor I was doing was like just in the household and just, like domestic responsibilities. There was actually so much more that was also imbued in like my ethnicity and like his white male privilege, that I just had such a big education afterwards
Mm.
about the different types of, it felt like for me, emotional labor that I was doing.
Yeah. Well, that does bring us to the conversation that we had the last time I spoke to you. But before we go there, I just wanted
Yes.
to ask, like, now do you see any kind of shift in that kind of responsibility in your parents? Like, has that kind of been brought to anyone's awareness?
You mean as far as like how they process or like they act in their emotional labor?
Yeah, like, do you think that anything has changed in their dynamic as these kind of words and vocabulary have started to kind of circulate more like prevalently in our culture?
I think no. And I think like, I think it is harder for some cultures, and I really don't. So this is just me saying that my parents are immigrants and they're coming from a whole entire world where you don't even talk about like severe mental issues.
Right.
So like going into the conversation, emotional labor is very, you know, almost like taboo. And I think I've tried to address it in ways that I think it was that I thought would be accessible to them. You know, like talking to my mom more about like boundaries, and these are emotional boundaries and these are my boundaries. And I think, you know, sometimes my dad is just like, I don't really know what you're talking about. But interestingly enough, I see him without him like using any verbiage or anything like that, enacting a more balanced emotional labor in his new relationship. Well, new as in like it's 10 years with another partner, versus my mom, who keeps saying she has the intention of wanting to do that more, but then like, you know, doesn't know how. So yeah, I mean, everyone just learns so differently, and I can only imagine that it is probably kind of a leap if you're, you know, both my parents are older. They're like in their 70s, so it's definitely like a jump for them, I think.
Yeah, I think we also probably just get so comfortable in these roles, right? Like, and
Mhm.
they really solidify into habits in our bodies and our minds. And like, if you're comfortable being a caretaker and like the nourisher and the nurturer, it's really hard to step back from that.
Yeah, or if you think that's the only role for you, you
Right.
know?
Right. If you don't really see other other options modeled for you, it
Yeah,
can be really hard.
yeah,
So the last time we saw each other, we were talking about the situation that you were in at home.
yes.
And I'd love to check in on where you're at with that now.
Um, do you need me to explain
Yeah,
any
whatever
part of
you
it,
think.
or
Yeah, for my 8 listeners.
for all the listeners out there? I mean, I think that a it it was so fun to talk about with you because it was like definitely layered, and it seemed like, you know, you had been in a similar experience at some point, and I was kind of in a place where I like needed help unpacking all of that. Um, and in this household, I think, you know, the interesting thing is that there's two males, two females, and both of the females, which, you know, I'm a part of, we're kind of like not, I would say, you know, we're not really into playing into like typical, I don't know, gender roles. And I know like I don't really like doing that either. Like I'll kind of like, I feel more fluid and I'll like switch back and forth. So sometimes it's just like behavior on the male side where we're like, no, we didn't like that. Um, and then the other interesting thing is one of the roommates um is very like fabulously gay, and it's also white, and one of the females is a black woman. And I think you kind of, and I'm the newer roommate, so I've kind of entered this household and I'm like, great, you know, like we've got, you know, these different ranges and it's going to be fantastic, and like I can't wait. And this is kind of where I see myself fitting in. And it was sort of this like surprising turn of realizing that, oh no, privilege still plays like a really strong role here. Um, and maybe being a little bit naive about thinking that that wouldn't happen. And one thing that I hadn't talked about that much with my friends at the time was, you know, white homosexual male privilege. And I think that there was some things that were happening in the house where, you know, I just never thought we'd have to talk about before. And some of the things were just more like personality style. Like this person was taking up a lot of space. This person was having a hard time realizing that the house was not just theirs, but for everyone. And I know I'm like trying to be a little bit general about it. I'm trying not to be too specific.
Yeah.
But I think what it came down to was just feeling like, okay, clearly we're not being given space. We're both women of color. We're not being given space. And we're also not being given space to like voice our concerns. And it got to the point where it felt very aggressive without, but without any air of violence, if that makes sense.
Emotionally aggressive.
Yeah. And so, we had a chat and everyone sat down and we talked about it. And
since I spoke to you?
No. So we talked about it and, I was very optimistic that it was going to turn into, a point of learning. There was a big lesson to be learned there. And I think, what was said was like, okay, I hear you. I'll try to be better about sharing the space. And I want you all to feel like this is your home. And the responses are great, but it's definitely action over words in this case because it's an, intimate way to live with people. And so when that didn't change, things got worse. And, the other thing that came into play was that the other woman of color was feeling like she was also specifically being treated in a way that she didn't really appreciate. And so it was like, okay, now we have like racism, gender, maybe a little bit of like, not classism, but like socioeconomic. Like clearly that person had like a very different family upbringing than her and I had.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like, how are we supposed to talk to this person? What are we supposed to do? Like, what do we need to do? What actions can we take? Clearly that last conversation didn't work. And the funny thing about your conversation with me is that you're like, oh,
You're like, we solved the problem.
Yeah,
they
we
just need to
solved
read
it.
white fragility.
Yeah, I was like, let's get educated. White fragility. I was like so excited. I was like, yes, we're going to do this together. Like, because ideally a solution to a problem like that is something that people can all engage in. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to get the book. I'm going to like, we'll talk about it. We'll have like book club.
Yeah.
So
Utopia.
Like, yeah. So I'm like skipping home and I'm like, oh my God, it's going to be wonderful. It turns out both of the white men in the house had already read it. And I was just like, wait, what? I was like, okay. And so then at that point, I think that's maybe the last where I had updated you.
Yeah, you just had texted me like,
like womp womp.
Yeah, like surprise twist.
Yeah, because I hadn't read the book and I was like, I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna,
Well, have you read it now?
So I got the audiobook and I'm like going through it.
Because I wonder about like, is it even appropriate to like for me to be recommending it to a person of color? But I think that it's actually, I mean, my hunch is that, and you can speak to this if you feel like you've gotten far enough, I don't know, but
I think everyone should read it.
Yeah, because I think that like even if because you are engaging with white people about racism.
Yeah. And I think a lot of my history with emotional labor is very much tied to that more than I ever thought in the past. And so that's been like a big learning lesson for me. So upon finding out that, that had already been read and digested by the two of them, I think I was just like, okay, so then, what's going on? And I think it is very different to like read something like that and maybe you'll just like passively agree with it versus like stepping out into the world and figuring out, okay, how can I be actionable about it? And I think a lot of the things that I have questioned, some other white friends on was, like, do you understand allyship? Like, do you understand how to like step up and have that conversation? Do you understand why it's so important? Do you understand that, just by being in a relationship with a person of color, you should come in with the mindset of like, okay, not only am I going to be romantically involved with this person, but I'm also this person's ally, because it is, you know, the responsibility of white people to have that role and play that role. But that is a hard conversation to have if like that person's never done it before, or they think they are an ally and they are an ally, but it's almost in this like removed way, you know, like I'm sure that, and I know that, you know, the two white men in the house are very supportive of people of color, you know, financially or, you know, just emotionally, and they have that capacity. But I think the whole having a conversation from one white person to another white person on behalf of another person of color
Right.
is a whole other practice and a whole other exercise, and is a whole other like stepping out of your comfort zone that doesn't get talked about enough. And
Well, and that
so,
was exactly, sorry, I feel like there's like a slight delay and there's no way we're not
oh
gonna
no, that's
overlap
fine.
each other. I'm sorry. But that was exactly the point that came up when we were talking, where I was like, oh, well, they should read this book then.
Yeah.
Like, because I think when we were talking, I was like, that's 100% the responsibility of the other white guy. And
Mm-hmm.
it sounded like that was something that you had kind of thought, but that like maybe I
Yeah.
was just being like a seconding, you know, like motion on that.
Yeah. Well,
But
it was something that I thought, and you were seconding it. I think that what was happening at the time was that person didn't want to do it.
right, because it wasn't affecting him, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is
Well, yeah. I mean that's a that
privilege.
that's a really solipsistic like view of yourself. I think like if something is affecting your partner, I would think that that you would want to take that on. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but again, maybe that's like my social conditioning as a female
That
girl.
is my social conditioning as well. And like to me, that is what an ally would do.
Right.
I do think that like it's natural to have a moment of like, oh, maybe it feels like I'm being made to pick sides. Maybe I don't want to talk to this
Well,
person.
it's uncomfortable.
It's
It's
uncomfortable, and
uncomfortable.
that's fine. But at the
Right.
same time, I think this is like the new thing of what like we all need to be practicing, which is like I need to get better at being like, hey, I really need an ally in this. Can you do this? Can you like take this emotional labor off for me and have this conversation? Because I'm also not great at that. This is very like that's new for me. And this has been fantastic because that's something that I'm starting to now ask of in my relationships, because now
Mm.
I'm very aware of how important that is to me. I was never asking for allyship before. I didn't even know what that was. Like, you know, emotional labor was still new. And, so, you know, I'm taking these baby steps. But the beautiful thing about, you know, once you get over your ego, which is, you know, what ended up happening with this person, is that when you witness someone being an ally for you, which I hadn't, also because I hadn't asked for a lot, but I had not witnessed a lot, is that it just gives you so many different forms of validation that you didn't
Mm.
really know that you had before. And also, you kind of just learn how language is different from ally to ally, because I
Yeah.
think maybe where I would have been sending out a message coming from like a place of trauma and a place of like emotional sadness or anger or frustration, you know, the ally gets to be removed and like take that out of the messaging and just deliver a more straightforward message, I think.
Yeah, that's honestly that's like bringing tears to my eyes, because it occurred to me as you were saying that like allyship can actually be incredibly intimate.
Yes, extremely.
Inviting, yeah, and asking, being able to ask someone for that kind of service, like again, I'll show you the wheel, but like being
Yeah.
able to in your relationship, in any relationship, like actually make that request and be coming from a place of like trust and knowing that that person will want to do that for you is
Yes.
like intimate. It's intimate. The ask is intimate, but
Yes.
the action of doing it is then like really intimacy building, I would think.
Yes. And it was so let me take a sip. So the one of the males wrote this like wonderful letter to, the other roommate that was being problematic. And
After we last spoke.
yes.
Okay.
And it was like so spot on and definitely delivered in a way that I could have never done directly myself, because I would have been in my emotional space, and that language would have been coming from that emotional space. And so to read it was in itself was like an education for me. And then also it was so intimate, and almost to the point where like both, so me and the other woman of color, we were just like in the kitchen, like looking at the letter, like dumbfounded, like, whoa, because we had never seen that level of allyship before. And we're so used to like kind of just like screaming, like, I don't have space, like I'm not being given a voice, or like whatever it is that's happening to us through, the privilege play, I'm not sure what the right words would be there, that are happening, that when the act of allyship came through, we were just dumbfounded. It was like, oh, what are we supposed to do now? Because we don't know. Like, what do we do with ourselves? Because usually we'd be like still
Fighting.
Or like,
Right.
yeah, exactly. And it was kind of really cool. And it was like, oh, I guess you don't do anything, and you can kind of like relax a little bit and just know that, somebody else has your back, and the onus isn't supposed to be all on you.
I just saw in you like a full relaxation.
Yeah, because I remember I was just reading it and you're like, what? And then you're like, oh, okay.
Right, like bracing yourself, and then you're like, oh, I can like let go of this tension.
Yeah, and I think that's when I realized like so much of those conversations, you are in some form or another coming from a place of trauma, because you feel like you're not being given what you need. It's not consensual in some way. And, to have someone speak up for that, I think we really need to be practicing that so much more.
Yeah, I was gonna, as you were talking about this, like this is something that I've thought about before. I was dating a person of color for several months up until recently, and I actually, one of the main reasons why he told me later that he actually didn't want to continue pursuing a deeper relationship was because I'm white. And but like during the relationship, like there were moments where I thought, like, I work in boundaries for a living, and I was like, wouldn't it be cool if he were down to, and I never asked, and I kind of like, I don't know why I didn't ask, but I was like, it would be really cool if we could like practice before it's necessary.
Yes. Yeah.
Like giving and taking feedback on both of our privileges. Like, we both had some privileges that the other one didn't have. Like, he was an incredibly attractive man, so like there's certain things that go along with that.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. And so there were, I kind of felt like there was like the possibility of us both being on both sides of that conversation. And like,
definitely,
I had wanted to bring up the possibility of like practicing that conversation, and we never got there. But I wonder, like, is that something that you think would be helpful, like in your home dynamic, or in these dynamics, like more theoretically than like your actual life right now? And what would that look like?
I think so. Weird true story. The problematic roommate that's talking about before is subleasing another place,
right?
And we've kind of had this like new roommate come in, and they've been here for like about a month. So it's like we were starting to be quarantined not long after, and it was like, okay, how do we get along with this roommate? What is the dynamic with this roommate? They're a little bit older, and I think is also very used to living with people, so they're good about giving space, and it has felt more communal. But the surprising thing is that this roommate and I have now like have feelings for each other.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which we're both like, how the hell did that happen? You know, and it's like, is it quarantine or is it love? We don't
Mm.
know. Um, but he is a white male, and I just like,
You're like the way you said that. It's cracking me up.
like it makes me tired. Like just the idea of it makes me tired. And I think that's because I was so burnt out. I haven't been in like a serious relationship with a white male in like 5 years. And
Mm-hmm.
that was like a proactive, that was a choice on my part. I was like, I can't do this right now because I still don't know how to, I was still learning what emotional labor means to me. But at this point, I've had like enough of an education and I've learned enough about myself to like just from the get go. I think when we realized we had feelings for each other, he was asking, you know, like what are you looking for in a romantic partner? You know, like what works for you? He had really sweet questions, and I was like, well, guess what? I'm not going to talk about that. What I am going to talk about is allyship,
Yeah.
um, because I think that so that idea that you had, I think, is such a wonderful idea of, you know, what if we could have this conversation from the beginning? And that is what I'm trying to do. So they are in the process of reading White Fragility. And I think it's just unfortunate that, you know, sometimes that emotional labor does have to be done by a person of color to an extent, because it's not like society has gotten to a point where this is common practice. So I think part of it is me having to understand that not every white man that I'm with is like personally trying to treat me a certain way. Part of it is a conditioning that they need to unlearn. And then the second thing is, you know, making my requests accessible. So, you know, this is what allyship means to me. This is when I would like for someone to step up for me. This is when I would like someone to use their voice for me. If you don't have a good understanding of what that is, here's a good resource.
Right.
And this is the first time that I've ever set that as, you know, just like put it out there in a relationship as new as this. And I don't even know if it's a relationship. Like that's how new it is. We're just, you know, having these feelings for each other.
Exploratory phase.
Exploratory phase, but like it can't hurt. And no matter what, even if a romantic partnership doesn't work out, you always need an ally.
Right.
So it's just a good time to do it. And it was received well. They were an active listener. They put their ego aside. They're very open to it. You know, like I'm going to take the time upon myself to learn more. I'm going to take the time to have conversations with my friends who, you know, maybe seem to be doing this for themselves, like other white people that might be doing this. And I thought that was great. And like, you know, I also felt like this huge sense of relief about that because I just knew that by doing that, I already like have gotten rid of some of the behavioral patterns that I would have had in past relationships because those boundaries have already been set and that person's already aware. So I'm actually very excited to see how it plays out. But we just had this conversation maybe like 4 days ago.
Wow.
It's like very new.
I can I ask like who brought it up and how did it go? Like I love these kinds of, if you don't want to talk about it,
Oh no,
you
it's
can just
fine.
pass.
He's very, very sweet. So I think he was like all caught up in the romance, and I was like, yeah, well, you know, it's not romantic. You're privileged, and you not being aware of your privilege. And I kind of came down a little hard, but that's just I can be like a little bit of a tough love person.
Oh, that conversation. I was wondering about like how did you finally get to a point where you wanted to say like I like you?
Oh God, that was weird. That actually, I think we've been both. These times are so strange.
Yeah.
I cannot, I cannot stress that enough. Um, and I think being in the house, being with the same people in the house, not really being able to leave the house, you get into your routine, you do what you want to do. And I think what it looked like was like, oh, this person's kind of aligning with my routine and what I'm doing. And it seems like they have a similar style doing it. And then it was like, oh, well, maybe we should do those things together because it seems fun. And like, we don't want to do everything on our own. And then it kind of moved from being like collaborative to more, oh shit, we like are crushing on each other. And then that's when we kind of both did this double take and was like, and we're like, wait, are we just like friends or is there something more? And it was like at the end of dinner or something. And I think we're putting a movie on and he like plopped on the couch. I was like, hey, I think I like you. And I was like, yeah, I think I like you too. And neither of us was like ready for that. So it was kind of like here we go, but also excited kind of feeling, and also hoping that we don't get sick of each other because we're probably trapped in the house for another month. So
I know. I love quarantine love. It's so sweet.
It's so weird.
But it's also like, it's just such a unique time. And I'm really, I'm obviously like trying to stay as optimistic and like grateful as I possibly can. But like, I'm really excited to see the stories of like the beautiful growth that comes out of this. Like, are you familiar at all with the term post-traumatic growth?
No, but
you
I
can
already
imagine.
like it. I already like it.
Right. So it's like it's not that it's like the opposite of PTSD, but it's like it's one of the kind of manifestations potentially of PTSD, or the coping mechanisms that prevent you from internalizing the trauma. I'm not an expert on this, but the idea is that like whatever, both on a sort of societal level and also on a personal level, that like through trauma there's also growth. And I think we're going to see a lot of that. I mean, we're going to see a lot of that, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah. And I don't, obviously not everyone's in this place, but one thing that we keep checking in with each other on is that it feels like in some way that's happening at a much faster rate than what we're used to.
Right. Because we're seeing it live. Like even like figuring out, we're all having to be so creative and so inventive with like figuring out how to keep our lives going and figuring out how to make money. Like I was just talking to Pete right before we started about figuring out, like I took a dance class on Instagram Live this morning, and there were 50 people in it, and it was my friend, and I was like, if everyone Venmo'd him $5, he'd be making like a decent living if he did this every day. And then I thought, like, I don't really have anything like that. Like, I don't have anything to teach or sell. And I actually don't think that's true. So
I disagree.
Yeah. I'm going to try to figure it out, and maybe you'll brainstorm with me later, but but I was going to, so this practice taking feedback idea, and you were also talking about like reading and digesting. And what it sounds like was happening was that these people that you're living with were actually reading, but not really digesting.
Yes.
They were kind of reading and they were like, oh yes, check the box of like, I read this book.
Yes.
Without necessarily the introspection and examination. One of the things that fascinated me the most about White Fragility was like the stories of people who electively took her workshops. I don't know if you've gotten to this part yet, but like she talks about it numerous times throughout the book, like people who voluntarily went to her workshops and then got called out for doing something that was very indicative of their privilege or very insensitive or offensive, like imitating like a Black voice. Like, and someone was like, hey, here's why that's like, don't do that. And then that person starts crying and sobbing and taking up all the space in the room. And then everyone else in the room gets mad at Robin DiAngelo for like attacking this person, And I just was like, this is absurd to me. Like, you chose to be here. If you think that you are immune to this kind of behavior and microaggressions or larger aggressions, then like, what are you doing here? And what kind of hope is there? So
I think I know why some people do that.
Do you?
Yeah, I think that in some ways, and I say some people, and this is because I have a mother who's a narcissist. And I think so in like the technical term, like, you know, like,
yeah, I didn't mean to laugh at that. It was just
no, she just is. And it's a scary thing. It is kind of a really scary thing. And I think that people are, who are on like the scale of narcissism, it can lead them to seemingly, you know, look like someone who maybe is an ally or is progressive or is supportive. But there's a difference between something being performative,
right, going
in the
through the
sense that it's
motions.
inauthentic,
Yeah.
versus actually, you know, embracing what that means. And I think a lot of times getting called out in those instances where you are performing probably feels like a shock because it is all ego based.
Right. Right. Well, and the so many of us have a knee-jerk reaction to like any kind of criticism that's like just defensiveness. And
Exactly.
I don't remember if I felt like this crystallized for me because of reading the book, or if it was something that I already thought about. I think it was something I had already been thinking about just in like other areas, but like I feel like we can train ourselves to use defensiveness and also jealousy, actually, instead of looking at them as like kind of just on the face of what they are, looking at them as you know, kind of like a Pavlovian bell of like, oh, shut up.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like shut up, look a little deeper. If I'm getting defensive and I'm getting jealous, it's because I'm insecure. So
Yeah.
instead of speaking, let me look at myself as and figure out what it is that this is, what the insecurity is that this is tugging
What is the real
on.
issue? Yeah. And that's amazing. That's like the first half of like nonviolent communication. It's
Yes.
like
Yes.
taking a step away from what you're saying and realizing like, what needs do I have that aren't being met? Or why is it that I'm actually feeling this way?
I love
And
that you just brought up that book.
yeah.
I was
I
thinking,
tried to do that with my mom and she didn't get it. And that's when I was like, okay, I can't help you anymore.
well, that one's also a tough one because it's written by a white man,
I
and
know.
it's also written in this way where like I feel like sometimes if anyone spoke to me with the exact language that he writes in his conversations, I would want to like punch them in the
Like
face,
not
like,
do it.
because sometimes it's so condescending. It's like it can sound really condescending, but I think that he's also not writing like verbatim what he actually
I don't think
says. And
this is maybe like unpopular opinion, but like I don't think he's like a great writer where I feel like obviously very powerful concepts, really great to learn, but it does, I feel like maybe where he thought he was making it accessible, it feels condescending.
Yeah. I think you're right. He's not an excellent writer. Also, his poems, like, editor needs to cut, just veto the poems. I like, thank you, Marshall Rosenberg, but like,
It's been a while
poetry.
since I read it, but yeah.
But I love that you brought that up because I've been thinking lately about white fragility and nonviolent communication as how they speak to each other, because and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Maybe we can meet up later, like after you've read White Fragility, and like bring them into conversation with each other, because one thing that comes up in nonviolent communication is like no matter how someone is talking to you, that you can identify the need. And in White Fragility, the way that she talks about taking feedback, like it doesn't matter if someone is screaming at you or angry with you or whatever. Like it doesn't matter the tone and how they say it. That does not negate the heart of the matter.
Right.
And so I kind of see nonviolent communication as like the other side of it, right? So like nonviolent communication is person A and person B is white fragility. Then like when person A gets feedback or criticism, and even if it comes at them perhaps what feels like aggressively or violently emotionally out of a place of anger, that the nonviolent communication person needs to be able to stand there and identify the need and not say, I can't hear you because you're yelling.
Right. And I think that's what true allyship is.
Right.
But you know, this is where I always get kind of muddled up in things, because I'm also like an empath, and I feel like where I still have a problem with being in the gray is like, all right, well, you know, the expectation of that is a lot. where's this person with their EQ, you know, how much, you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
is this person capable of doing that? And again, this comes to like being in a room with a therapist, my mom, and in that book, and us being like, she's just not understanding it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, like mental blocks are a really real thing.
Well, how much of that do you think is like, I don't know if it's possible to even parse this out. Your mom is a complete and complex human being, but like,
Yeah.
do you think, how much of that do you think is cultural, and how much of that do you think is?
For her, I thought it was very cultural. She's Colombian. I think if you are completely stereotyping, Colombians are known for like their fieriness and like
Mm.
passion and kind of like living large in this emotional space. Magical realism comes from Colombia. It's like
Yeah.
you just are elaborating in your words and your emotions and even in your movements, like through dance. And so
I'm
if you
thinking of
are,
a peacock.
yes, and if you are identify so strongly with that and you are like one with that, and she had extreme pride in being that, which, you know, pride is attached to ego. She just could not remove herself from that, and because of that, she felt that removing herself from her emotions was stripping herself of her like own identity, and she
Right.
was like, I'm not doing that.
Hmm. That's interesting, because I don't see it as removing emotions, right? Like, and I doubt that, I would imagine that you see it
No,
similarly. Like,
it's just like a processing step.
it's right. It's a processing step. And it's also a way to help you get what you need, right? Like,
Hmm.
it's a way to help you actually get what you want more efficiently and effectively, um,
Yeah.
based on like language, and not just verbal language, but like body language and
Yeah.
things like that. I think,
Yeah. But I think
yeah, go ahead.
the situation that you're saying with like person A and person B is really interesting. And I think that in an ideal sense, everyone should be doing that. I know that it's really hard to take feedback when someone's screaming at me.
Yeah, for
um,
sure.
but
For
also, I think in
sure.
the sense of like a racial dynamic, people should be taught that you probably do need to take a step back and listen to what that person's saying. And
And also, I think that it comes with like intersections of identity. Like, I think that if 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 you explode at, because you're stressed, and you've like hit your limit, that
mhm,
shouldn't mean that someone then is allowed to like tune you out and tell you to
right.
calm down.
Yes, because no one likes that.
No one likes
Like,
that.
don't tell me to calm down.
No, I
Yeah.
know. That's one that's always amazing. Whenever anyone says that, I'm like, has anyone ever said that to you?
Like, does that work? Like, who does that work on?
No, that when someone says calm down, it doesn't make me want to take a breath.
No, it's just like, you're not validating me, so you can stop saying that, and let's just
Yeah. If someone wanted to say to me, like, can we take a deep breath together?
yeah,
I
that's
think
actionable. I can
I
do
could,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a lot better than like calm down. But I think this also brings us back to like what we were talking about at the beginning about language as power, that you were
Mhm.
saying that like when you learned the term emotional labor, it like cracked your brain open.
Oh, well, yeah.
Like the times that I can point to in my life when I've had a word change, like a complete like shift my worldview just by
Mhm.
understanding that it's maybe systemic and not just like a
Yeah.
feeling that I have,
Yes.
or like gender, sexuality, like that,
Yes.
the vocabulary there just in the last 10 years I feel like has made us all understand, like it has truly cracked open like a world of possibilities for so many of us. And the wheel of consent, I'm excited for you to see that too, because I feel like that language and that framework busted open like and completely reframed almost every like relationship that I've had,
Yeah.
familial, work, romantic, friendship. So but I think that like what you're talking about with your mom, it almost sounds like it's a semantic issue, right? It's
Yeah.
like that she thinks that it's, emotional repression or like separating herself from her emotions, when really it's like that's kind of a semantic issue.
Definitely. definitely. And it's I think the thing that I become unsure of is, because we don't do this a lot, is how much education or time does someone need to put in to like catch someone up? You know, like how much work would need to
Yeah.
put in for her to figure out that it wasn't semantic.
Right. Right.
And she wasn't getting anything out of, like, we did probably 4 more sessions the day that, like, I just remember looking over at the therapist and her and I were both like, "Huh." And my mother is a professor, like, she's a doctor, she has her PhD, she's very in like, her IQ, you know, is, I would say, high, but her EQ is probably a little bit lower than she thought it was.
Hmm.
And so I could just get really curious about, like, what kind of work and how much work would it take for her to realize that it wasn't about that?
Right. I've been thinking about that a lot in my friendships lately and how I've been starting to feel like certain people in my life have been kind of not even like my deliberate, I haven't been doing this deliberately, but I've started to feel like there's certain people in my life that I've kind of grown out of in a way
Mhm.
because I'm just our like personal journeys are really veering off in different ways
Yeah.
I I when I meet new people and I want to and I'm like kind of determining if there's somebody that I want to keep in my life
Mhm.
or if maybe they're more of a, like acquaintance or whatever. I'm I am unconsciously, it's becoming conscious, but like I am unconsciously kind of checking out like where are we along that journey. So like
Yeah.
if someone is not on board with like practicing gratitude and
Yeah.
instead is maybe like obsessed with being I wouldn't say obsessed, but like paralyzed by the guilt that comes from their privilege, for example,
Mhm.
instead of maybe looking at their privilege as like an incredible privilege that they
Yeah.
are grateful for and that they're going to use and take on as a responsibility. Like
Mhm.
it can be really hard to, when you're just at a completely different place than someone else, whether it's like spiritually or emotionally or any of those other things.
Yeah.
It can be, I think that can be like the making or breaking point with a
Definitely.
lot of
And I
relationships.
think like the I think we need to be more creative in our generosity and like how to be generous within certain types of privilege, like whether it's racial or financial or emotional. Um, and that's still something that I'm just realizing and trying to figure out, you know, because I don't think anyone's really taught that either. But because we are living in a time where access to language maybe is just easier because of the internet, or access to language is easier because we are learning these things about ourselves as a society historically, um, that it's this sort of like hyper growth where where, you know, 8 years ago, like, I wasn't asking probably half the questions I was asking people now, or kind of like demanding of them, which is like, if you want to be close, if we're going to have an intimate relationship, however that relationship is, I need these things. And um you know, before I probably would have been friends with people that weren't as mindful and weren't as thoughtful, maybe weren't even as generous, and I didn't care, because I was just ignorant, um and I didn't know how the what the downside what the I just wasn't aware of what the downfalls were there.
Hmm.
um
That
so
actually that makes me think of something that you said earlier that I feel like we kind of glossed over, but like
mhm.
you were talking about how you moved into the home and thought like we have so many different like identity intersections here, like it's going to be great, right?
Right, yeah.
Whereas like in fact I think the thing that determines it's awareness. It's like the
Mhm.
awareness issue of like just because someone's identity contains multiple intersections,
Yes.
it doesn't mean that they're thinking about it critically. It doesn't mean that
Right.
they are aware of what it means and what it represents to other people, and like how it makes them interact differently with other identities. And
Right.
so I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to that.
I mean, I think that I was just hopeful that
Yeah.
it would mean
Right,
that
right.
we all were self-aware in how we identified and how maybe that would affect other people in the house. Um, and I think it was probably a bigger learning curve for me because I also saw this person as someone who seemed on the outside to be very supportive.
Mhm.
Obviously, being a friend with someone and living with someone is a completely different experience. And I think if you were a friend to that person, um, there maybe wouldn't be as much issue, but because we were living with that person, it just really magnified so much. And I think this person had privilege in like a racial sense, a financial sense, a familial sense, like, you know, like
Mhm.
even their family, the love that they got from their family. Um, and I think what I was shocked by is that somehow, um, I think sometimes, you know, where I was speaking to before is that everyone should learn, you know, how to be generous in proportion to, you know, where they're at in their role of privilege. I think that there also is this weird thing where sometimes people will, through the guise of generosity, will also just be a little manipulative.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's what was kind of happening where, you know, I walked in and I was like, okay, great. You know, I actually thought I was walking into an all queer house, which was, I was super excited about. And then
Hmm.
I found out that wasn't the case, and I was like, okay, that's fine. I can deal with that too. um, but it was this thing where I was like, oh wow, this person is so generous. You know, like I can't believe that this is happening. And, you know, like basically like offering up their food every night, or like, you know, bringing flowers home, and then, you know, at first glance it's like, oh, those things are really nice, and this is really sweet, and then you start to realize, like, oh, there's never any space for you to like do that, or like bring the flowers home, or like if you do, they get, you know, moved somewhere else because that person
Hmm.
is very, and I'm just trying to use like small examples. And the other thing is, like, sometimes I think what seems like generosity can just be like a control in disguise of like, you're gonna eat
Yeah.
my food, this is what I'm giving you. You know, I'm not really giving you the opportunity to say yes or no, I'm just like serving it to you, and the expectation is that you're gonna take it. And those acts, while maybe they seem to be good to the person who is providing them, is not really consensual. Like, did you ask
Yeah.
me if I want to partake in this? No. Did I receive it, you know, the first couple times that you provided? Yes. Did I expect that that meant that I, you know, was going to lose my, you know, I always have the capacity to use my voice, but did it seem like I lost the space to use my voice by just accepting that? Yes, it did. And then that's where the line was. And it's just
Yeah.
been this really weird and complex and really like fragile and like subtle lesson of this in a household. Because to be honest, I've only ever had a dynamic with like, the closest I had to this was just living with a, you know, white male partner. And I think in the past, because that was several years ago and I didn't have the learning lessons that I have now, it just seemed like, oh, that person was a bad partner romantically,
Hmm.
not realizing like there was, you know, other things at play.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think like the more that we learn about how systems exist and also interact and also oppress us,
Yeah.
we can see things a lot more clearly, and then we don't even need it can actually like lessen the impulse to blame people,
Yeah.
right? Because we can actually, like, if we can all look at the systems and critique the systems and try to change them, then we don't need to change the individual. We don't
Yeah.
feel the need to change the individual or to blame the individual or to, make make them feel bad for whatever it is that they're doing.
Yeah. And I think this lesson has been so interesting because it's happened in like the most domestic way ever,
Right.
which is, by this person choosing to like make this grandiose dinner every night and like offering up to feed it to everyone. We realize like, oh, well, I like to cook and I like being creative in the kitchen, but I don't have that space anymore because you're always there taking up that space. And when we've asked for that space, it's not given.
I think it's really easy for us, like for people who lean toward the service side of things, to think that like there's no way that this won't be appreciated. And you can, in fact, serve non-consensually, unsolicited advice, trying to help people in the way that you want help and not in the way that they want help.
Yes.
It comes up a lot with like love languages, right? Like if mine is different from yours and I'm trying to give to you in my love language and not in yours, then you're not going to feel the love.
I'm obsessed with love languages. Cool. I had this thing that didn't work out with someone just because of our love languages. Mine was words of affirmation. That was maybe like the last one for them. And theirs was what's the time? Quality time. And physical touch. But in my mind, I'm like, say something. Why don't you say something? Like, I really need to hear these things. And, it's just such the learning curve. And, the relationships are just so hard.
Well, and how much effort and energy do you want to expend on
exactly
teaching someone how to do that for you?
Yeah. That's it's like, and that's it. And that's something that I've had a lot of conversations about with, my other friends of color who are in like, relationships with other white people, which is, are you ready to do that a certain level of emotional labor? Because no matter what, it's going to happen. And I think in the past, maybe some of us have been resentful without knowing that emotional labor had to happen. So it was kind of like, okay, I'm in this relationship with this person. Oh wait, why am I having to do all this work? But the reality is, it's like, it's going to be work no matter what. Are you in a space to do that? Is your tank full? Can you take that on? Is it worth it with that person?
How many spoons do you have?
Because that's the reality of it. But then the flip side is like, is your partner open? Are they listening?
Yeah. Are they trying to like take in the training, right? Like, because you don't want to have to ask every time. So like, if this person is starting, hopefully they're not starting at zero.
Exactly. But just hope they're not at zero.
Right. But then like, if they are, or wherever they are along that journey, if they aren't then starting to predict like, oh, this is a moment, and like starting to shift that burden away from you for asking and training them over to like taking it onto themselves. Like, at what point is that a burden that needs to be shared? And at what point is it a burden that should really be like taken away from somebody?
Yeah. And I think that to me has probably one of the most interesting things that I've been talking to people about, is just that play of, yes, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to do certain types of emotional labor, and the person with more of the racial privilege would just be aware, but we're not there. So we have to like set these new boundaries for this back and forth that there's no manual for, and society doesn't teach us about.
Right. Well, I think we got to wrap up.
No,
I know. You and I can keep talking for a second because there's a couple things I want to ask you, but but I do want to ask, in wrapping up, what 3 things? So like media, books, movies, people, family members, anything, or a job that you had, or like anything like that. 3 things that you feel have brought you to exactly this moment in your life.
Yeah. Shirley, who we mentioned before with emotional labor, she also taught me what gaslighting was. And between those two
Oh,
terms, I was like,
amazing.
I ran and never looked back.
That was another one for me too, where I was like, oh
Oh
yeah.
my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like gaslighting. Oh, I know what that is.
I just watched a movie where like gaslighting was happening and the woman was like, you're doing this thing where like you're trying to make me feel like I'm crazy. Like she just defined what gaslighting was, but it was before the word was known. And so I was like, oh my God, like
you're
we
like,
have
you're doing it.
Yeah.
That's hysterical. You're like, you got it. Yeah. God,
Anyway.
language is so powerful in that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, shout out Shirley for those two terms. I think the other thing was in this like weird way, if I hadn't been in a relationship with that partner in the past,
Yeah, totally.
who had less than desirable behaviors, I probably wouldn't have taken the time to like assess and look back and see why I was feeling a certain kind of way.
I love that gratitude even for the things that aren't so positive sometimes.
You just gotta like take the lesson where you can find it, and that's
Right.
the best that you can do. I want to do like a thanks. I did two people, and I wonder what that would be.
A book or
Yeah,
an experience that you had maybe?
Actually, yeah, I do remember. So this may be a little controversial. But I think so after that relationship, I was like, I just can't date another white man. Like I can't do it. And I went through like a period of time where I was like, I'm choosing not to date white men. It's not happening. And I was in a relationship with another man who was mixed, and he was half Black, half Puerto Rican. And it was kind of the first relationship that I had gotten into with another man, but he was obviously a person of color. After, post the other like traumatic one that I've done a lot of growing from. And it was just so easy. Like there was just conversations that I didn't have to have, that was just the response was just like, oh, I see you, oh, I hear you, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I realized that in those times I was so ready to invest like another 15 to 20 minutes into like, okay, well, this is why it upset me, and this is, like the intricacies of that situation. I was like, oh yeah, you don't have to explain it, like I get it. And I've learned so much from the relationships I've had with people of color, because one of the really great things about it is that you're just seen a lot more quickly. And I think it's really important to know what that feels like so that you can set that expectation. Well, maybe not expectation, but try to set that as a marker of sorts moving forward, because unless you know what that's like, your baseline might just feel like you have to do so much emotional labor to be seen.
Yeah.
So that for me was like a really important education. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I love that. It also shows, I think, that you really value, the fact that you just chose like 3 people, I think it shows that you really value relationships and human connection. And maybe that's where a lot of your personal growth comes from. It's like the in-between
Totally.
you and me kind of thing.
Yeah. That word is coming up so much. I'm like, I'm always in the in-between. I think I just said that yesterday.
I just watched Before Sunrise, and the best part of that movie, I think, is where she says, I think if there's a God, it's not in you or me, it's right here.
Ah!
Yeah, I know.
Love that. I've never seen it. Yeah.
it's so good. It's
Well,
so
it's so
good.
true. Oh my God. So I was also having conversations with that. So I have this like tattoo here, and that's kind of
Mhm.
what that symbol means.
It's
It's
a triangle with a dot on top.
it's like little cross, and you can't see
Oh,
it
it's
very
a tiny
well, but
cross. Okay.
yeah. You know, this like triangular dynamic of I'm at one point, you're at the other point, and there's space in between us. And I think that the best outcome of whatever's happening between those 2 points is when the space between us is really like channeling a higher
Yes.
space.
When it's something bigger than the sum of its parts.
It has to be.
Yeah.
And I think that you really, at least for me, because I crave like high levels of intimacy, and some people are just like, whoa, I can't do that, it's too much.
Yeah, I have the
And I'm
same.
like, I want more.
Right. Like we can go deeper. There's
Yeah,
deeper
I'm
to
like, no,
go.
come on. Yeah. But for me, it's like I need that space because I need a sacredness, and I need something that it feels protected, and I need something that feels safe. And I think that that's also something that people could try and practice more. And it's not easy to practice, but gratitude again
Yeah.
is like the easiest way, I feel like, to feel spiritual or feel that something is sacred, or really just like be so in tune with really positive emotions that just get you out of yourself, and like get you out of your small world, and get you out of your ego, and just humble you so that you can really connect with that person. So the in between is all good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's good stuff in there.
Good stuff.
All right, Stella. Well, I want to ask you where people can find you and your work.
The Last Hartman, Hartmann, and then also just my website, stellahartman.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm on Instagram at Mia Schachter. That's SCHACHTER. And you can follow the podcast at Share the Load Podcast. Special thanks to Pete Ziarto at Director Pete on Instagram for recording, editing, producing help, and for removing all of my burps. And to Tyler Fjeld for the music. You can reach me at podcast@sharetheloadinc.com.
Yay!
Yay, that's it.